Welcome back everyone to UFTA Premium, and I have some wonderful news to tell you. This particular board that you're going to see in this video comes to you by way of Print and Play. So shout out to them. I'm very grateful and thank you for their wonderful contribution to this project of mine. I'm grateful and satisfied. But of course, I hope everyone is staying safe and taking necessary precautions. Board games and games of all types are fun, but obviously not at the expense of people, right? So, anyway, with that in mind, I just want to say yes, thanks again from the bottom of my heart. And let's move on to the content of this particular video, okay? And what is that? Well, I found, I guess I would call it a dilemma. And that is the status of the greenhouse, right? So let's just review the greenhouse again. We'll take another look at it. We know it's worth 18 tokens, right? And, originally this card, to get the game balance right is not easy. This card was cheaper, right? But the power that it bestows on any particular grower is considerable, right? They have the luxury of moving an item in the market on their turn. And not only that, because the greenhouse, once it's purchased, is an activity, that means, they can make use of that activity once every time it's their turn. So that's a lot of market manipulation. That's a lot of serious game adjustments, right? And so we just want to make sure that we rein in that power a little bit. And I was thinking, well, the way to do that is to play test, yes, once again, which I've done. But in this particular case, the way to alleviate this greenhouse problem is I figured out, well, why don't we just make it harder for them to manipulate stuff in the market? And the way to do that is just a natural, logical extension of the set of rules that are already in place in UFTA. And so what rules am I referring to? Well, it has to do with the marker tokens, right? Again, marker tokens allow for you to protect your assets, and you, as the grower, get to determine what those costs are going to be. So anyway, with that in mind, I'm just going to demonstrate a few rounds where the greenhouse, in fact, no longer has quite the power that it did. And in fact, the components, or the marker tokens, are going to be a way to keep the greenhouse at bay. They no longer have to lose their assets if they're just sort of vulnerable in the fields. If you put some protection out there, that means that the greenhouse can no longer move those items in the market, right? And so let's just set that up. Sometimes it's just easier to visualize these things, right? And so each player is going to begin certain resources. All right, so now our example is set up, and let's go ahead and resume gameplay. Each grower has a certain amount of items. They have plenty of planted crops. Grower number 3 has a high tunnel, and they have several items that are doubly planted in their field, so they're set up really well. Grower number 1, of course, has 2 items in the harvester, and grower number 2 is the owner of the disc, and they have a full set of crops on all of their fields, right? Now, they begin, none of them have protection on their items. However, the person who owns the greenhouse, that's going to be grower number 1, is going to have the opportunity to shift things every time on their turn. But with the presence of marker tokens, these growers can decide on what they want to protect, right? Once any item, once any crop in any field in gameplay has a marker token on it, then it is no longer capable of being moved in the market. And the one exception, of course, is that the grower who has marker tokens on their own items, that owns the greenhouse, they are going to be able to move their items even if marker tokens are placed on them. So we'll just kind of see this in example. Let's say, let's go ahead and start. So I roll a 1. Not exactly what we want to test. We'll ignore that. Alright, so we're going to ignore that. 5 is productive. So now this person has the options. Knowing that another person has the greenhouse, this person over here has to be savvy, and they have to say, well, wait a minute. What should I commit to protection? If I have a 2-crop combo, let's say I have beans and chard, those are lined up in the market, right? So maybe I need to invest in protecting those, right? And that, in fact, might override a concern such as this. I have potatoes. If you'll notice, potatoes are extremely high in the market. They're 11. But the 2-crop combo of beans and chard might bring in a bigger haul, right? And so if that's the case, I want to probably commit a little bit more protection to those assets. And so what I would do is this person's going to protect their beans, and they're going to protect chard. All right, so that's gonna look like that. So what does that mean now? That means beans and chard cannot be moved in the market. So that's all good and fine. You say, what about die roll number 2, right? Doesn't that move stuff in the market? Well, what are you going to do in that case, right? Well, die roll number 2 is a little bit different scenario in that, well, I'm not completely, I'll be frank, I'm not certain at this point, but my initial gut feeling is die roll number 2 should stand because, for one, ownership of the greenhouse is a separate issue from something that's fundamental to the game, which is a die roll outcome of number 2, right? Those fundamental things really don't get messed around with or shifted, right? But the greenhouse, on the other hand, was a personal decision by one particular grower, and that adds a little bit of a different nuance, a little bit different scenario, right? So we have to kind of figure that out. But for now, we're just going to say die roll number 2. You can still move things in the market regardless of marker token protection, but there's pros and cons to everything. The pro to doing that is I don't have to worry about shifting game balances or anything like that. But what I do have to be wary of is if I do change it, the one thing going for that is it would be consistent with the rest of the game. Moving things at all can't happen if there's protection on top of the items, right? And it could be that's more fun, right? Or that just creates a better game. So anyway, let's see what happens here. They rolled a 5. They used the activity of placing marker tokens. That's fine. Now they're probably going to do 2 actions. Notice how they actually... Yeah, now this person had a difficult choice, right? They put the protections on here because they didn't want the 2-crop combo to go away. However, they are going to be lacking funds because they don't have enough to harvest, right? So they're going to end up doing a tractor return. So they took that chance, they knew it. It was one of the difficult decisions in UFTA you have to make, right? So all they could do at this point is utilize only one action, cultivating. Maybe grab some change. Okay, so they did that. Now they have to do a tractor return. Grab the 5. This goes right here. And they're going to give up something nice, which is radishes. They're going to give up their potatoes. Actually, okay, so check it out. Here's another point where you can be strategic in UFTA. As the person who assesses penalties on others, this person who does the inspection can remove an item that disrupts their 2-crop combo, right? And so that kind of adds another wrinkle. Yeah, when the tractor return happens, can that items still be moved? And in this particular case, I would say yes. Tentatively, I'd say yes. And the reason is a tractor return is something that is unnecessary, right? It's unnecessary. And so that's something that individual growers are going to have to be cagey about. If you commit protection markers onto your crops, and then you end up in an audit situation, and you're like, well, wait a minute, this just undoes all that protection that I just put out, right? So it's another wrinkle, another step to help you stay cagey and UFTA. You got to think about it. Is a tractor return going to happen if I overcommit to protection, right? So anyway, that's a very interesting wrinkle, and I like it. So I think as it stands, yes, you should be allowed to move the item because this person had the opportunity to figure out the math and they didn't do it, right? Okay, so there's that. And yeah, I'm sorry. Beans move up in value, right? Beans move up in value, and so that was a very instructive moment, right? We learned a lot. Tractor returns, what to do about them. Or just how about normal negotiation situations where you're removing items or grabbing from the bag? That's going to disrupt what happens in these fields too, right? So it seems to me, initially, the only thing that moves, that can't move, is the greenhouse, right? That was the initial problem to begin with, right? So we kind of want to understand what's the forest from the trees, right? So the real problem was the greenhouse. It doesn't affect, at this particular time, the other game elements. Okay, so there's a 6. Choice, right? So here's another facet of the gameplay. This person rolled a 6. They can do a sabotage on this person over here to disrupt their 2-crop combo, right? They still have one. It looks like they have chard and potatoes, right? So here's another case where maybe the kingmaker effect can happen, or at least a third or fourth or fifth party can have a major impact every turn, right? They have a sabotage opportunity. They sabotage this person's chard, and so when they do that, now this person's chard and potatoes are sitting there blowing in the wind. They're really vulnerable, right? Okay, so here we have a case where 2 just random game elements disrupted their plans for 2-crop combo. So this is a good thing. You got to be savvy and paying attention to play your best game. Okay, so they sabotaged, and now they have the same interesting idea. Are they going to cultivate and harvest? Okay, so their best bet is to just go ahead and harvest. They're going to cultivate and harvest just like on a normal turn. But it's 2, 4, 6, 8, right? So let's you got to make sure you're paying for things accurately, right? So here's 10, here's a 5, here's 6, 7, 8. So we have 8. And also 8 goes into the cup, right? The other thing I haven't quite nailed down is if we're going to keep track of cost and other expenditures, or how much of the hunger tokens needs to be printed. It's hard to say, right? Okay, so there's that. Yeah, now we're going to go ahead and harvest. We got potatoes on the corn on the wrong one. I don't have to worry about shifting game balances or anything like that. Notice how we don't flip both fields over because there are still items in the field. That's something that it's a little wrinkle in the rules, but you do need to be aware of it, right? Whenever you have the high tunnel in place and you start accumulating extra crops on extra fields, the field doesn't get turned over. You don't lose the item, right? Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna move to the next one. 4. Okay, so now this is this person's first opportunity to use the greenhouse, right? And what items can they sabotage? Well, quite a few, right? I mean, not sabotage, but disrupt in the market. But let's say things are different, right? let's say all of these have marker protection on them, right? Every single item. Including this person's own items, okay? So now the question becomes, what can and can't be moved, right? This person is going to utilize the greenhouse on their turn. They have spinach and corn, so that's fine. We can just line those up easily. But now we have to look and see what else, is the item that's being replaced, is that represented elsewhere? And does that have marker protection on it too? Because if it does, it means the switch that we want to make can't happen, right? And so, really when you're trying to consider all of this, it's almost like you need 4 items. You need 4 items that are available and free. Maybe not just 2, or at least 3, right? I gotta think about that, right? It's 3. Talking about getting the math wrong. It's this guy. So, it's really 3 items that have to be free of marker tokens. But, again, the person who owns the greenhouse, if they have marker tokens on their items, they don't have to worry. That's like, that's your home base, it's the home team, home field advantage, whatever you want to call it. That kicks into play, and then as a grower, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, life's hard enough as it is, right? Okay, so what we have is the opportunity to do this. We could move corn up to the spinach, or we could move spinach down to the corn. So the first thing we do is we look and say, oh, gee, are cucumbers protected anywhere on anyone's farm? And the answer is yes, they are. So cucumbers is out. So our next option is to go to the spinach. Can spinach replace peas? And the answer is yes. That's because nobody else has peas, right? So that is a clear case of where we figured out percentages, probabilities, and statistics of what may or may not be happening on this particular in this particular game instant. They don't have there doesn't seem to be a conflict. So now what I can do is I can simply instead of moving the corn up where the spinach is, I will move the spinach down to where the corn is. They're going to be bosom buddies, right? Awesome. Okay, so we did that, and now we're just going to harvest, and we can collect on our 2-crop combo. Notice how the last 5 rule kicks in, because we have 5 and 5 on our assets in the field. We can go ahead, and since we have plenty of capital to work with, to cultivate and harvest 2, 4, 6, 8. We get to collect those last 5. Just 10, 2 back. Alright, so now we're cooking, right? We cultivated and we're going to harvest. Notice that we can harvest for free. Always, always bearing in mind on your turn that you need to take advantage of all the opportunities and advantages that you have. Otherwise, you'll be overpaying for something. Spinach and corn. Spinach and corn is 7 plus 1 is 8. Neither one on the right spot. That's okay. And then we double that to 16. And somebody gets a subsidy. Last place is going to get 1.6, right? 10% of 16. 1.6 rounds to 2. And that's going to go to... it's this person, I believe. Okay. We collect our goods. And then we'll be on our merry way. And so far so good. It looks pretty nice. My intuition and my gut feeling right now says we're going to leave things alone. Let sleeping dogs lie. We have die rule number 2 is not going to be affected by any of these changes, but the greenhouse itself is going to have its wings clipped a little bit, and it still is a robust and wonderful, wonderful item. You just got to do a little bit more work to earn it, all right, and to use it properly, right? Which is okay, because that's what we like. The overall structure and top-down game balance is going to be perfect, right? With this particular This just a minor change, right? So anyway, that's a great example of how you gotta make a little bit of tweaks here and there, nips and tucks, try to figure out exactly what's wrong. Everything looks good, it looks balanced, it looks organized, and I'm feeling pretty good about this. So that's a good change to make. The only other thing that I want to bring up in this particular video, topic that I want to mention at the end here is whether or not there's some question as to whether or not when you purchase assets, whether or not those purchases should also go in the cup, because there's a little bit of a redundancy at the end. If you keep track of those particular expenses and the assets themselves have a value that you count towards your score, well then that nullifies, and it's kind of like it's a redundancy of the game. So the pros and cons of keeping it as is are just almost as strong as the pros and cons of keeping it out. And so I'm not sure. Maybe it's okay to have one redundancy just for the sake of clarity and understanding exactly, what is the purpose of keeping track of the expenses in the first place. And that is quite simply, like in real life, you need to keep track of your budget and expenses in order to figure out, are you making more than you're spending, right? And that's what it kind of boils down to. So in that respect, it's a very important point to make. I think for now I'll just keep it as is, but there may be enough playtests to gather enough data and information to figure out, well, maybe that was a mistake after all, right? Human beings are fallible creatures. We make lots of mistakes. So I think we're going to leave it at that. Thank you once again to the good people at Print and Play. They helped me out. And yeah, have a wonderful day, everyone. See you later.